I do not get this. The two things that confuse me most. I read a brilliant article about it this weekend. You know that I'm eternally baffled by deference and forelock tugging. The idea that anybody in this country with an IQ in double figures could think that Jacob Rees-Mogg is cleverer than them is just absolutely hilarious to me, and also heartbreaking at the same time, because you are limiting your own horizons. You're putting shackles on your own children, their ambition and their aspiration. The idea that you should know your place is the single most toxic lesson that you can teach a child. And I'll tell you this, that they don't teach their children to know their place. And the second thing is this desire to feel persecuted, this absolute hunger for victimhood. Look, there's some people over there and they're attacking you. What are they doing? Oh, they're running the European Union like the Fourth Reich and they really wish you harm. Okay. Any proof? No. Don't ask for facts. Just feel persecuted. And now it's statues. They're coming to take down your statues. They're going to attack your culture and your stately homes. How are they going to do that? By telling you about things that actually happened. Well, we can't have any. I'll clutch my purse. And they sell it. They sell you your own victimhood. And I don't know. I wish I could turn my conscience off and do it, because my kids need shoes. But especially now they're going back to school. Hallelujah. Long may that continue. Safely. But it works. I don't understand why people hand over their hard-earned cash and indeed their consciences so happily and so freely to people who are selling nothing but false victimhood and false persecution. Best summed up probably in that despicable poster that Nigel Farage unveiled shortly before Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist shouting Britain first. That man was terrified of things that don't exist. Things that were, in fact, depicted, non-existent things depicted on that poster. All these people that wish you harm. Where are they? Oh, I found one. And that means we must hate 6 million people. Okay. Why so hungry? Why so desperate? And listen, generalisations are always a little bit loose. Of course they are. I remember a fella not long ago was furious with me for suggesting that everybody who had a problem with Marcus Rashford had voted for Brexit, which clearly isn't true. There'll be plenty of people out there. I'm bored of Brexit in some context. I'm bored of having to say, some of my best friends voted for it, some of my family members voted for it, and they aren't racists. But I haven't met a racist who didn't. Maybe I should get out more. But you just look at the generalisations here, and you can be fairly confident that people who think that their culture is somehow under attack, or people who think you're not allowed to say your English in this country anymore without getting arrested, people who are trying to build political careers on campaigning to be allowed to say things that they're currently not allowed to say, despite not having yet addressed the question of how they're going to tell you about the things they're not allowed to say if they're currently not allowed to say the things that they're campaigning to suddenly be allowed to say. I'm fairly confident that almost all of them will fit very neatly into one side of the Meghan Markle conversation. They'll have a huge problem with her and they won't really be able to tell you why. But if you suggest you know why, they'll be almost as angry with you for pointing out their racism as they are with her for being biracial.
Credits to James O'Brien for the original discussion and commentary that inspired this video. There is something deeply revealing about the way certain people react to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. Because when you really listen to the arguments, when you strip away all the outrage and emotional language, you realise that many critics cannot actually explain what Harry and Meghan did that was so terrible. They just know they are angry. And that is where this whole story becomes fascinating. For years now, huge sections of the media have convinced people that Harry and Meghan are somehow villains, not flawed human beings, not a complicated couple navigating impossible circumstances, actual villains. But ask someone for specifics and the answers become incredibly vague. They complain too much. They are disrespectful. They betrayed the royal family. Meghan changed Harry. Okay, but what does any of that actually mean? What laws did they break? Who did they harm? What exactly justifies the years of relentless hatred, insults, mockery and obsession? Because the intensity of the backlash has always been completely disproportionate to anything they actually did. And that is why this conversation matters. The truth is that Harry and Meghan became symbols in a much larger cultural argument. They stopped being treated like individuals and started being treated like threats to a certain worldview. Prince Harry was supposed to know his place. That is really what this comes down to. He was supposed to stay inside the royal system, smile politely, ignore the press abuse, and accept the rules. Instead, he stepped away. He criticized the media. He publicly defended his wife. And for some people, that crossed an invisible line. Because in Britain, there is still a strange obsession with deference. People are taught to admire hierarchy, to respect status automatically, to believe that certain institutions must never be challenged, no matter how unfair they become. Harry challenged that, and Meghan represented something even more unsettling to parts of the establishment. She was not born into British aristocracy. She was American, independent, biracial, successful on her own before entering the royal family. She did not fit the traditional image people expected, and that made some people deeply uncomfortable, whether they admit it or not. Now, here is the important part. Not everyone who dislikes Meghan Markle is racist. Of course not. Human opinions are more complicated than that, but it is impossible to ignore how often racist language, stereotypes and double standards appeared throughout the media coverage surrounding her. The evidence is overwhelming. When Meghan spoke openly, she was called aggressive. When Kate Middleton stayed private, she was praised for dignity. When Meghan cradled her baby bump, newspapers accused her of vanity. When Kate did exactly the same thing, it was described as tender and loving. When Meghan ate avocado, headlines linked her to environmental destruction. When Kate received avocado as a gift, it was charming and wholesome. The same behaviour received completely different treatment depending on who was doing it. That is not an accident. That is narrative building. And once those narratives take hold, people begin repeating them without even realizing where they came from. That is why so many critics struggle to explain their opinions properly. They absorbed a feeling rather than forming a conclusion based on facts. The media told them Meghan was difficult, manipulative, controlling and disrespectful, often enough that eventually it simply felt true, even though the evidence was incredibly weak. Look at how often people claim Meghan changed Harry completely. Changed him into what exactly? A husband protecting his wife? A father prioritizing his children? A man speaking openly about trauma and mental health? If anything, Harry appears more emotionally honest now than he ever did before. But because he no longer behaves the way some people expect a prince to behave, the assumption becomes that Meghan must be controlling him. And honestly, that idea is insulting to Prince Harry himself. This is a grown man who served in the military, spent decades inside one of the most famous institutions in the world, and lived through the trauma of losing his mother under intense media scrutiny. Yet some people talk about him as though he's incapable of making his own decisions. Why? Because he chose his wife over public approval? Because he refused to quietly tolerate the same press behaviour that haunted Princess Diana? Because he decided that protecting his family mattered more than maintaining a public image? None of that sounds irrational. In fact, it sounds completely understandable. And there is another uncomfortable truth many people avoid discussing. Some critics seem almost addicted to the idea that they are under attack, that their traditions are disappearing, that their culture is being erased, that modern society is persecuting them somehow. Meghan Markle became a perfect symbol for those anxieties. A modern woman entering an ancient institution. A biracial American becoming part of the royal family. someone who represented change in a system built heavily around tradition. For certain people, her existence alone felt political. And media organizations understood exactly how profitable that outrage could become. Fear sells, victimhood sells, anger sells, convincing audiences that people like Meghan Markle are somehow threatening traditional values creates endless engagement, endless clicks, endless outrage cycles. And the saddest part is how much humanity gets lost in the process. People forget there are real human beings behind these headlines. Harry lost his mother while cameras followed every moment of public grief. Meghan spoke openly about feeling isolated and mentally overwhelmed. They repeatedly asked for privacy and protection. Instead of empathy, they received ridicule. Imagine being told your suffering is fake because newspapers decided audiences would enjoy mocking you more than understanding you. That is what makes this entire situation so disturbing. And through all of it, Harry and Meghan kept becoming bigger targets simply for refusing to stay silent. That is the key thing some people cannot forgive. They spoke back. They challenged the press. They exposed uncomfortable truths about royal life and media relationships. And once they did that, there was no going back. Because institutions rarely react kindly when insiders start revealing how the system works. At the heart of this story is something very simple. Prince Harry saw history repeating itself. He saw his wife becoming consumed by hostile coverage. He saw the same obsession, the same intrusion, the same pressure that surrounded Princess Diana. And he decided he was not willing to sacrifice his family for the approval of tabloids or tradition. You do not have to agree with every decision Harry and Meghan have made to understand why they made them. But if people are still struggling to explain exactly what terrible crime Meghan Markle committed besides existing differently inside a traditional institution, then perhaps it is time to question whether the outrage was ever truly about her behaviour in the first place.